Goramagat Cahirlock, and I want to welcome the Minister back to the House. You spend as much time nearly in the House as we do ourselves at the moment, and I suppose that's a reflection of how important this House is treating the issue of housing. But Minister, I'm glad to welcome you to the House today and Cahirlock to move the motion on behalf of the Fianna Fáil group, which reads that this House, Shannon Éireann, believes that a secure home is a basic human right, that COVID-19 highlights the essential protection a secure home provides, that far too many of our citizens are homeless, that essential middle-income workers are struggling to secure an affordable home. And we believe that young people should expect to secure an affordable home in our country. And we also believe that the state has responsibility to protect our citizens' rights to a home. We want to acknowledge, Minister, the government's historic housing and homelessness prevention budget, the government's radical and ambitious affordable housing legislation, which will see the state, under this government, lead the provision of social, affordable and affordable cost rental homes. We also want to acknowledge the statutory establishment of the Land Development Agency to work with local authorities and other stakeholders to maximise the use of state lands to sustainably develop social and affordable homes, both for purchase and rent. We want to acknowledge that historically, state provision of housing was determined by the prevailing and changing political will. And we acknowledge that post-COVID Ireland aspires to a society where everyone has a safe place to call home. Bunreacht na hÉireann explicitly protects private property rights in Articles 43, but it doesn't have a corresponding right to a secure home. And a constitutional right to housing would permanently assert the state's responsibility to ensure access for all our citizens to adequate, safe and affordable housing. A constitutional right to housing would permanently propel the state to sustainable housing policies designed to ensure access for all to secure housing, and a constitutional right to housing would not guarantee everyone a free home. But the programme for government, Our Shared Future, does commit to establishing a commission on housing and to examine the issues around housing, such as tenure, standards and sustainability in the provision of housing, and that the programme for government commits to holding a referendum on housing. So on that basis, we're calling on you, Minister, on behalf of the government, to exercise every resource to achieve a sustainable post-COVID future where every Irish citizen has a safe and secure home, for all Irish citizens to be given the opportunity, through a constitutional referendum, to mandate not just this government but future governments to pursue sustainable housing policies which ensure that every citizen has a secure home, by amending Bunreacht na hÉireann to include a right to housing, and specifically to amend Bunreacht na hÉireann to include two provisions: that the state recognises and shall vindicate the right of all persons to have access to adequate housing, and that the state shall, through legislative and other measures, provide for the realisation of this right within the available resources. And we call on the Minister for Housing, Local Government and Heritage to advise this House on the holding of a referendum to allow the Irish people insert a constitutional protection to secure housing for every citizen in Bunreacht na hÉireann. Cahirlock, I don't think there's any member of this House that doesn't recognise the crisis in housing that is gripping our society and our country. And I believe we all in this House consider it unacceptable that there are more than 6,000 people homeless. And Minister, I certainly know you do. And that there are tens of thousands of working people who cannot afford to own their own home. And there are tens of thousands of people who are renting in unaffordable situations with insecure tenure. And that there are teachers and nurses and guards and all of the frontline workers that we've all, the bus drivers, the healthcare workers, the shop assistants, who are either locked into unaffordable rents or locked out of owning their own home. And for our children and for our grandchildren and for everyone, it is really important that this government has made housing such a priority, and that this government is doing everything it can to address the housing crisis. So it probably begs the question, where are we going with this motion? And I suppose where we're going with this motion is beyond this government and beyond this House and beyond politics. And we're going to Bunrocht na Heron, and we're going to our constitution, which basically captures the values for our society and the values that we aspire to and that we want to uphold and to deliver for our citizens. And in terms of this government and in terms of the historic budget, 3.1 billion, 2.2 billion in capital spending, the biggest social housing programme in over a decade, is going to deliver 12,000 homes, social homes, 220 million in homelessness prevention. All of that is really worthwhile and is absolutely essential to, in the short term, addressing the housing crisis. The Affordable Housing Bill, which we have been debating in this House today and over previous days, that will establish a lead for the local authorities, for the state, in the provision of affordable homes, both to purchase and rent. The affordable cost rental, a model that exists in Vienna in Austria, that was born there after the war, when it, as a society, wanted to ensure that everyone had an affordable home. It is really important, and that is why we are actively championing that affordable cost rental model in Ireland. And we absolutely support you, Minister, and the government's efforts to bring that forward in the Affordable Housing Bill, and the fact that you will not only have the state take the lead in the provision of affordable homes, both to purchase and rent, and social homes for those who can't afford to purchase, and protections for those who are homeless. But you will also use and seek to use any private homes that are being delivered through Part 5, and a doubling of the social and affordable element in every private development, and going further still by providing financial support to people who want to buy their own home, who are paying more in rent than they would in a mortgage, and doing that through the shared equity scheme. The establishment of the Land Development Agency to strategically manage public lands, state-owned lands, lands owned by the Department of Health or the Department of Defence or other state authorities, and use those lands to deliver affordable homes. That is game-changing, and that is going to deliver for generations to come. It will allow the state use those state lands for maximum public benefit. And Minister, I know you and all of the department are working on a new Housing for All programme, which in July will deliver even further in terms of multi-annual targets and multi-annual budgets. And really, I suppose, once we pass the legislation, it'll make sense then to add more funding and significantly more capital funding. And I note the ESRI's report. I think it is welcome. I think it is timely, their report, which is encouraging the government, based on both the need but also based on the financial environment, to increase further the capital budget over the coming decade. And I believe this government will do that. But we are in a crisis, and this crisis didn't happen overnight. And I think that's why we come back to the fundamental question here of how do we compel the state on a permanent basis to ensure that the state takes the lead and the state delivers in terms of ensuring every citizen has a right to a home and every citizen has access to a secure and affordable home. I believe it is morally, politically, economically, socially, in every respect, I believe it is the right thing to do for us to have a right to housing in our constitution. I believe socially, only when you have a stake, only when you feel like you belong, only when you are part, that you really get that cohesion. And far too many of our citizens do not feel like they have that sense of ownership and ownership of a home. I think that if we want to, for the future, and when we talk about a post-pandemic Ireland, and we want to talk about it being sustainable and it being a country and a society that captures our values, I believe the majority, maybe not everybody, but the majority of Irish citizens do believe that right to housing is a basic human right. And I also believe that politically, and I think on a European stage, we need to accept that Ireland is behind here, you know, our European neighbours. Constitutionally, Finland, Belgium, the Netherlands, Sweden and other countries have already got constitutional protection to the right to a home. Germany, France, Austria and Luxembourg have all legislated for it. The International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights calls it out. The European Social Charter commits to it. The UN Sustainable Development Goals that we have signed up to as a country requires us to ensure that every citizen has access to secure and affordable homes. So I think when it all boils down, and I appreciate the time is moving and I have to share some with my colleague Fiona O'Loughlin, the fundamental question that we have today to ask ourselves is, do we believe that access to a home is a basic human right? And if we do we want to act to call on the Minister to ask the citizens of Ireland their opinion? And do we want to give them the choice through a referendum to mandate not just this government, but future governments? I don't think it is a decision just for politicians. I think this is a decision for the citizens of our country. And I think it is one, Minister, that I would urge you and the government to put to our people, to give them the opportunity to express the value that they want for our country in a post-pandemic Ireland. Gormagat.
Thank you very much, Cathaoirleach. And it gives me great pleasure to second this motion, and indeed this motion goes to the very heart and the very core of my party, Fianna Fáil, a party that I'm proud to represent and a party that have done so much work in the area of providing homes and providing sustainable communities. We are now in a crisis, and when we look even at the past week and the amount of time that even within this House we have spent discussing housing and debating housing, we can see that it absolutely is the most crucial issue of the moment, and rightly so. A lot of our time over the last number of years has been taken up both in the Dáil and the Seanad in relation to the crisis of Brexit and of COVID. Now we need to completely redirect our energy and our focus in terms of housing, in terms of ensuring that people have the opportunity to have a safe, secure and affordable home. My colleague, Senator Fitzpatrick, is absolutely right in talking about bringing that debate from these houses to the people of the country. We need to have a national conversation in relation to the right of any of us to a safe, secure and affordable home. And we need to have that enshrined in Bunreacht na hÉireann forevermore, so that generations of politicians and generations living in our country will have had the benefit, hopefully, of that inserted within the Constitution. When we're talking about the crisis in housing, we're talking about many different cohorts of people. We're talking about those that cannot afford a house of their own, and they make up a housing list right around the country, including 6,500 in my own county of Kildare. We're talking about people who are continuing to live with their parents well beyond the time that they should have moved into a space of their own. We're talking about families living in very cramped accommodation, not being able to afford to either possibly buy a home of their own or indeed to upgrade from a starter home to a home that they can bring their family in. We're also talking about a generation of people who are possibly ready to move from a larger home, who have reared their families and want to have the opportunity to go to a different type of living, be that within a type of retirement complex or to have a smaller town centre home close to services. So we need to look at all of the different cohorts, and in particular those that have no home to call their own, that are living in emergency accommodation, and the devastating impact that that has on the family unit. And speaking even to teachers in schools, where they see the impact that has on children in terms of their ability to learn and to progress, because toxic stress within a family has a devastating impact on students, and this has been shown through research carried out in America. So we need to be very mindful of the generations coming through, that they will have the best opportunities in life. We also think, of course, about students having access to accommodation close to their college, their place of education. So there are many different cohorts of people that we need to cater for. We all need to work together. We all need to put party politics aside in relation to working on housing. And I honestly believe that by inserting the right to housing within our constitution, to a certain extent, that takes the politics out of it, because we all have that united aim. So let's all get behind this motion, and I plead with my colleagues to do so. Take the politics out of housing and do our best to ensure we have a national conversation, and that people down the line will thank us for inserting that. Thank you.
Sharon.
All right, Senator Sharon Keoghan.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and welcome, Minister, again, and thank you, Fianna Fáil, for bringing this bill to the private member's bill to the House today. What does a right to housing mean? The Simon community defines a right to housing as, at the most basic, the right to have your housing needs met by the state if you cannot meet them from your own resources. In 2020, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission carried out a survey. 82% of the people in this country believed that such a right should be a human right. In 2020, 8,200 people, including dependents, were homeless in this country. In 2020, if there had been a right to housing in our constitution, the government would have been guilty of infringing on the rights of 8,200 times. Every good argument has two sides, and in this case of whether the Irish constitution should have a right to housing, the two sides of the argument must be carefully considered. Many are in favour of a right to housing. Home for Good is a group of organisations and individuals who believe that the constitutional change is an essential underpinning of any successful programme to tackle our housing and homeless crisis. The group argues in favour of a right to housing. They consider the proposed right to be necessary to rebalance the Irish constitution. Is the constitution imbalanced? Currently, Bunreacht na hÉireann expressly protects private property in Article 43 and states that such private property rights can only be infringed on the purpose of the common good. However, there is no definition of the common good. As the Home for Good position paper explains, this has had consequences in the past. On 12 separate occasions over recent years, it has been found that pending legislation to reform Ireland's housing crisis has failed to progress in the Dáil when Article 43 was raised as a barrier. 12 pieces of legislation which could have helped one of all those 8,200 homeless people in this country. Or, on the other side of the argument, was there 12 pieces of legislation that would have compromised private property rights of our citizens? Home for Good claims that the Constitution is imbalanced, but in the interest of balancing rather than shifting the weight, it should be asked, what consequences do we face if the Irish people vote in favour of a constitutional right to housing? A vote in favour of a right to housing would make the right of an enumerated right. This is a right outlined and enshrined in the Constitution. The Irish Constitution has several enumerated rights, such as the right to freedom of assembly, the right to association, the right to freedom of speech. But there are other rights which we have, rights which are not enshrined in the constitutions. These are unenumerated rights. The rights to marry, the rights to privacy, the rights to earn a living and the rights to bodily integrity are examples of unenumerated rights. These are rights which are not written in the Constitution, but instead are derived from rights which are enumerated. In the case of McGee and Attorney General, the right to marital privacy was derived from the protection of marriage in Article 41 and the protection of personal rights in Article 40.3. In a recent Supreme Court case, it was speculated that the rights to a clean and healthy environment could be derived from Article 10, protections on the ownership of natural resources and state property, as well as other constitutional protections of the home. If the right to housing becomes an enumerated right, what rights will the courts derive from it? New rights that the governments and the people of Ireland do not get a say on. The Dáil voted against the introduction of a proposed right to housing in 2017, and maybe, as the Home for Good paper suggests, this was laziness. It is easier to use Article 43 as an excuse than to reform. Or maybe it was becoming creating rights have consequences, and creating rights create responsibilities. The right to housing is being sold to us as a solution to a problem which we have, but is it? The UN has recognised the right to an adequate housing as a fundamental human right. The International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, which Ireland has ratified, includes a right to adequate housing in Article 11. Countries include South Africa, Scotland and France have incorporated a right to adequate housing into their constitution. Nonetheless, homelessness still exists worldwide. Nonetheless, housing markets still have supply shortages and rising demands. Nonetheless, problems remain. It is not a negative, but a cautious note I want to impart here as we consider today's private member's bill. Creating a right to housing does not only create a right to housing. It empowers the courts to create rights that go beyond a right to housing. And with rights comes responsibilities. Responsibilities which the government, businesses and taxpayers would have to carry. And with rights do come solutions. The ERSI do not recommend a right to housing. They recommend we double our investment in it. They recommend building 35,000 homes a year when we are only building 15 to 20. They recommend we borrow more, build more. With rights only comes responsibility. And is this government prepared to take on such responsibility? I doubt it.
Senator John, comments.
Thank you very much, Cathaoirleach. Welcome Minister Burke back to the House, and to commend my colleague for putting forward today's private member's motion. This is a discussion which we had as a joint Oireachtas committee in November, I think it was. We had Wayne Stanley, Rosemary Hennigan, Professor Jerry White and Rebecca Keating in before the committee, and they put forward quite comprehensive testimony in relation to the importance of this and associated matters, and in fairness to the committee members, they put forward many questions, and Senator Keoghan has touched on the word adequate housing, which was a question I asked at that time, which was, what is a definition of adequate housing? Is it a one-bedroom apartment for a one-year lease? Is it a three-bedroom house with secure tenure for life? And I suppose these are things that will have to be teased out as this debate happens. And I know in the programme for government, the government is committed to a commission on housing and a referendum on the right to housing, and I look forward to that debate happening in due course. You know, housing as a topic is so important, and I suppose it's probably appropriate that this debate here is happening on the conclusion of what was 16 and a half hours of committee discussion in relation to the affordable housing bill. And I had the pleasure, along with some of my colleagues, of being here for every minute of that debate. And, you know, many of the contributions that were put forward, and there were some amendments, constructive amendments that were taken on board by government, which goes to show that, you know, we accept, you know, we don't have every answer, and we're always open to constructive engagement with the opposition. But it is important in this wider debate that we pause and look at what we are trying to achieve with the affordable housing bill. We are going to be providing affordable purchase homes on council owned land for local authorities to be able to provide affordable purchase homes to people who live in the area, and the various other set criteria, not for, as was suggested by some on the opposition benches, for prices of 450,000, and, you know, the misleading description was said that the government was trying to pass that off as affordable housing. Absolutely not. And local authority affordable purchase homes will not be in that bracket. In fact, the Minister, and I might be corrected, is on record as saying they will be between 160,000 and 310,000 euro, depending on the area of the country. And in addition to that, the Minister is also on record as saying that he will provide additional resources through the Service Sites Fund, particularly in areas like Dublin that face affordability challenges and challenges in terms of construction costs, that the threshold for that 50,000 would be increased in order to make those homes even more affordable. In addition, in the Affordable Housing Bill, we have the cost rental scheme for the very first time, building on what is in place in countries across Europe, where we link the cost of the rent to the provision of those homes, the building, the financing and maintenance of those homes over a period of 40 years. We're increasing the Part 5 provision of affordable housing from 10% of social to 20% now, to include at least 10% of affordable purchase homes in developments. And we also have a shared equity scheme, which many on the opposition benches are opposed to. But in reality, that is a scheme which is going to provide immediate assistance for those people who find that they have affordability gap between what the market price of a unit is and what they can afford to get in terms of a mortgage. It's going to have an immediate impact, and I would like to see, we don't know actually from the debate that we just had whether the opposition are actually in favour of the affordable housing bill or whether they're not, because while they called a vote on it, then they refused to put forward tellers in order to actually tell us whether they're in favour or against or abstaining on the affordable housing bill. That will be obviously interesting when we get to report stage, or when it comes back to us. But look, the issue of housing, as has been said by Senator O'Loughlin, is one that we should all be putting our shoulder to the wheel and working together on. It should not be a divisive issue, and it's very unfortunate that on the opposition benches that it has been made a divisive issue, because if we actually put all our collective wisdom together and work together on this issue, we can resolve it, because we need to resolve it for every person in this state. Thank you.
Senator Rebecca Moynihan.
Look, and I am sharing time with my colleague, Senator Banabachik, 4 and 2, if that's okay.
Agreed.
Agreed. So the constitutional right to housing, along with other socio-economic rights, is something that the Labour Party has been wholeheartedly in favour of for a number of years. Enshrining socio-economic rights, including a right to the home in the Constitution, will make a difference to people in this country, but it will not solve all the problems. It will not end the housing crisis overnight, and it won't be a silver bullet. But I believe it can make a difference, and a significant one on that. Introducing a constitutional right to housing is ultimately a policy direction for both the government and the courts, and that is really the effect of it. Time and time again in the last few years, particularly when it comes to things like renters' rights, we have heard that it has to be a balance between renters and landlords. But that in itself is a policy choice. And the materials that are here, which I want to credit Home for Good and the people involved in that were coming up with the wording, is important. But many of them say that, and constitutional scholars in this area say, that the apparently existing constitutional impediment towards good progressive housing policy doesn't actually exist. And indeed, that is based on court decisions themselves, which were in very specific circumstances from nearly 50 years ago. That's not to say that we're not in favour of this, but I think it's important to put it in that context. When most people think about a constitutional right to housing, they think about using public land to build public homes exclusively. They think about the state following what the ESRI said and double capital expenditure and being a significant player in the housing market rather than simply trying to incentivise investors to come into the social housing market and housing market. Ambitious building programmes, not relying on investment funds and developer and investor pals. They are policy choices, and they can and will be continued to be policy choices if and when we have this constitutional right to housing. As we have seen over the last few weeks with the Affordable Housing Bill and not putting affordability at the heart of that rather than below market discount, and with the government failing to consider apartment homes, and for failing to protect people who live in inner city neighbourhoods and city neighbourhoods from investment funds, including the profit motive into cost of rental, not taking on board the opposition's affordability concerns, they're policy choices. Time and time again, policies that do include the commodification of social housing, failing to give renters long-term security of tenure, gentrifying places in the inner city and forcing single people out of cities due to high rents and exorbitant house prices are policy choices. So I and the Labour Party wholeheartedly support the right to housing in the Constitution. But I do say this: we need to make sure that we have both the policy choices and the laws to be able to back that up, to vindicate people's right to housing, to vindicate housing standards, to vindicate their right to long leases, and to vindicate their right to have a decent quality standard of living for affordable price linked to their income and not just below market rents.
Gramagad Cahirlik, and thanks to my colleague Senator Moynihan for sharing time. I'd like to welcome the Minister to the House. And as Senator Moynihan has said, we of course support the introduction of a constitutional right to housing. It's so important that housing, that the right to shelter, that the right to a home is seen as a basic human right in our fundamental law, and we support that wholeheartedly. But we also need to see, Minister, practical measures put in place, as Senator Moynihan has said, in the shorter term to vindicate people's right to shelter and to ensure that people can access affordable homes. And the problem so far, and the problem in recent years, is that we have seen a complete lack of prioritisation of housing. The last 5 years wasted when we should have seen supply of housing, we should have seen the building of housing, the building of affordable housing for people and affordable homes. Because that wasn't done, we now have a national housing crisis, and because that wasn't done, we now see people across this city and across the country priced out of renting and priced out of buying homes. We have worked with government and will continue to do so to engage constructively to ensure that there is better protection put in place for tenants, and I'm glad to say that this afternoon in our debate on the Affordable Housing Bill we did succeed in having a Labour amendment accepted by the government that will improve the protection for tenants, that will improve the cost rental model that's been put in place, and that's hugely important because tenants in this country need to have better security of tenure, and we need to see principles around affordable rents put in place. We know that in Dublin Bay South, for example, the average rent is €2,111 per month. For that to be affordable for most people, they would need a take-home pay of €6,333 per month, approximately 1/3 net income. So that's simply not sustainable, Minister. We've allowed investment funds, we've allowed institutional investors to keep market rents at an artificially elevated level and to price people out of renting and indeed need to price people out of buying homes. And I will say this finally, that for Labour we have been putting forward for a long time the urgent need to build more houses on public land, to build 80,000 homes over 5 years on public land. That was our manifesto in last year's election, and we feel that the government has simply failed to grasp that mettle and has failed to deliver on housing to the extent that they should have done. We'll hope, Minister, that we'll see changes in policy. We want to see homes made available for people, not just to see housing as a constitutional right, but to see housing as a reality for people across the country. Gurmahagat.
Senator Pauline O'Reilly.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I'd like to share my time 3 and 3 with Senator Garvey.
Is that agreed? Agreed.
Thank you. And welcome, Minister. The Green Party believes that access to adequate, secure, affordable and environmentally sound housing is a basic human right. This right should be set out in our Constitution. We call on the Government to move urgently to bring forward a referendum to amend the Constitution to include this right to housing. That's what it states in Green Party policy. And we decided to go into government last year because we want to put this into our Constitution, because we believe in stepping up to the mark and actually putting our money where our mouth is. And that's what we have been doing. And there are record amounts of funding going into housing. There has been a difficulty with COVID that the Minister has faced. However, despite that, we've had debates over 16 hours, as one of my colleagues said, over 16 hours in relation to the Affordable Housing Bill. This is before it even goes into the Dáil. We've had pre-legislative scrutiny of the Affordable Housing Bill, and we have really, really radical things that are in that bill that are going to transform housing in this country. For the first time ever, we will have cost rental on a legislative footing. That is something that the Green Party has been looking for decades, to follow this Vienna model of cost rental. And 38% of countries around the world actually have a right to housing in their constitution. So this is Ireland, and this is this government moving to where we should be. And I do think it's important, notwithstanding some of the comments there that, you know, there are different decisions by the courts. But the key issue is that we have one right in relation to housing in the constitution, and we don't have a complementary or even competing right there in order to make that decision on a case-by-case basis. We actually need to have both in the Constitution. If we're going to have ownership, we need to have the right for housing in there as well. But this is also, for me, very much about what type of housing we're looking at. Yes, it's a right to housing, and Senator Boyan had said it here during one of our debates, but this is a right to homes as well. And what do homes look like? Well, homes have to be comfortable. In the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, it lays out there that actually it's a right for children as well to have housing, but it's the type of housing that you have. You need to make sure that you're not just paying a mortgage, but that you can afford to eat in that home. What type of community are you in? It needs to be intergenerational, it needs to be diverse and inclusive, and fundamentally, it needs to be one that is sustainable throughout the generations. That means that you have all of the amenities around you, and it's the most environmentally friendly thing that you can do to ensure that everything isn't far away from our homes. In Galway, travelling from one side of the city where all the housing is to the other side where all the jobs is, we have to stop that approach to housing, and I believe that's what this government is doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Welcome to the House, Minister. I can't see how anyone could have an issue with this motion, to be honest with you. It simply wants it enshrined in the Constitution, the right of housing. As the motion says, it is a basic human right. It acknowledges there are far too many homeless, and it asks that we put into our Constitution that the state has the responsibility to protect citizens' right to a home. In the motion, it mentions very strong amendments that the state recognises and shall vindicate the right of all persons to have access to adequate housing. The state shall, through legislative and other measures, provide for the realisation of this right within its available resources. What would be useful would be if the opposition offered to work with government parties in helping resolve the housing crisis, which has no one quick fix. This bill is far from perfect, but no one bill, no matter who wrote it, would solve the housing problem overnight. But it is a big step in the right direction. The bill will lead to more houses built on public land, more people being able to buy their own houses, and for the first time ever, a brilliant cost rental scheme with security of tenure. I support this motion, and it is another step in the right direction.
Senator Fintan Warfield.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. We need a radical new plan for housing, and we need to move on from the failed policy of rebuilding Ireland. We need to recognise that if the state is serious about meeting the needs of workers and families, if it's serious about fixing a catastrophic market failure, then we need to double capital investment from 1.4 billion to at least 2.8 billion. And by public housing, I mean social housing, affordable cost rental, which we have long supported in Sinn Féin, affordable cost purchase, all on public land and delivered by local authorities, approved housing bodies and community housing trusts. And I propose to split my time, Cathaoirleach, 3 and 3 between myself and Senator Boyle. I propose the amendment and I move the amendment.
Is that agreed?
And if we're to wean the state off its dependency and subsidy of the private sector, then we need to target 20,000 social and affordable homes every year. That's what's needed to address social and affordable housing need.
And that was what was being proposed, that was agreed by the House. Can I just check that with the Senator? You're proposing to share time 3 and 3 with Senator Lynn Boylan?
Yes, that's
correct.
correct.
Is that agreed?
Agreed. Cathaoirleach, I welcome every opportunity to talk about housing, and this Fianna Fáil motion follows Sinn Féin's motion when we highlighted the dysfunction of the private rental market, and since then renters face the prospect of an 8% increase. And I know that Taoiseach has said on Wednesday in the Dáil he gave a commitment to prevent that 8% increase, but let's be honest, we need to ban rent increases for 3 years because renters are being fleeced. Sinn Féin have long supported Home for Good, and I commend the campaign. This Fianna Fáil motion tonight calls for a right to housing to be inserted into the Constitution. But it's 2 years since Fianna Fáil voted against a referendum bill on the right to housing in the Dáil. Why are Fianna Fáil so late to the table? Why did they vote against that bill in 2019 that would have triggered a referendum? Can we expect Fianna Fáil to finally come round to the idea of a 3-year rent freeze, or to Sinn Féin's proposal to put 1 month's rent back in the pocket of every renter in this state through a refundable tax credit? We can't afford the time, and the people can't afford the time that it takes for Fianna Fáil to slowly come round. We need Fianna Fáil to show up. So why not do this? If the motion is to have any impact tonight, let's set a date for a referendum on the right to housing, give the public a vote whether to insert into the Constitution the right to appropriate and affordable housing and an obligation to eliminate homelessness. Set the date and let's have the referendum.
Senator Lynn Boylan.
Gurmagad Cathaoirleach, and welcome to the Minister. I welcome the opportunity to speak on the right to housing because Sinn Féin has long supported such a referendum, and a referendum has been discussed in committees for years, and now a motion is being discussed in the Seanad. And I would respectfully suggest that it would be a better service if we could see the legislation that has been promised in the programme for government to deliver that referendum on the right to housing. The idea of referendum has been discussed for long enough. The housing crisis is at breaking point, and I note that we have no indication given in this motion of when we will expect to have that referendum. When it comes to action, Fianna Fáil's record is severely lacking. In the first budget of this government, there was no meaningful additional capital spend as part of Darragh O'Brien's first spending proposals. There was only 160 million in additional capital expenditure to deliver only 993 extra homes, 124 million to deliver an additional 593 social homes, and 35 million to deliver just over 400 cost rental. Sinn Féin has outlined how the government must double capital expenditure in public housing and embark on the largest investment in housing in the history of the state, something that's also supported by those radical bodies, the ESRI, the EMF and the EU. Sinn Féin in government will invest at least 3.8 billion to deliver 20,000 public homes on average per year during the term of government. It is also deeply disappointing that Fianna Fáil, it seems, has hijacked the good work of Homes for Good. Fianna Fáil have learned nothing from the constitutional changes that have happened in this country, because if they had been paying attention, they would know it does no one any favours for one political party to co-opt a campaign. The big constitutional changes have been won because of decades of campaigning, the hard work of civil society organisations working tirelessly to get cross-party consensus. If Fianna Fáil was serious about enshrining the right to housing, they should be working to bring a cross-party legislative proposal on the right to housing to the Oireachtas. This motion takes the wording directly from Homes for Good, an excellent organisation that has been campaigning on this for years, but you wouldn't know that from reading the motion. You wouldn't know it from listening to Senator Fitzpatrick's speech. There's not a mention of homes for good. This is the wrong way to go about building support for a referendum. And if Fianna Fáil do want to get serious about a right to housing and to build that cross-party support that will be required, then they will find that Sinn Féin's door will be open to those discussions. But let's not forget that wording is Home for Goods wording, and you don't build a cross-party consensus by not acknowledging who did the work.
Senator, are you seconding the amendment?
Yes, second the amendment.
Thank you. Senator Alice Mary Higgins.
Hello, and I welcome the fact of the motion being put forward. I welcome the fact also that a bill to address this issue was put forward in the other House, and I think that this is a sign of the momentum and the demand that is there in respect of housing in the country. However, I'm not going to deal with maybe the early parts of the motion, and I know there's counter-motions and counter-motions around the different parts of the housing policy, because I do want to focus primarily on the constitutional referendum. But I will note one of those who has called and advocated very strongly internationally on the right to housing and indeed we know the UN committee who were mentioned in economic, social and cultural rights. They've spoken about the right to adequate housing. But Lelania Farah, who is the former UN rapporteur, Special Rapporteur on Housing, who wrote to our government expressing specific concern on policies and laws that treat housing as a commodity and undermine the enjoyment of housing as a human right, and specifically identified in that the issue of global capital's role in housing as security for financial instruments and the financialisation of housing as being a key counterpoint, a key underminer of the achievement of the right to housing, be it in the Constitution or not. And again, this is disconnecting housing, as she said, from its core social purpose. And I think that is why there are many positive things in the legislation that is coming through. But it is really important that we listen to the concern and what we're hearing from the UN level and others, that there are tensions in terms of the financial instrumentalisation and the role of a global capital market, and its aims are not necessarily the same aims that we may have in terms of indicating the right to housing. So we need to be very careful on the power balance in relation to that. And there are still concerns, unfortunately, with so many other positive aspects of the legislation, but there are concerns in addressing that tension, which has been correctly identified by the UN rapporteur, not simply based at looking at Ireland, but looking at Ireland in detail and indeed at the wider perspective. And this is the context of this right to housing. It's not simply, wouldn't this be a nice thing to have, and wouldn't it be a good thing to have, and it would show how much we all care. And I know that that's not true. I'm saying it is important, it is necessary because of the way the Constitution has been interpreted. It is necessary because it's not simply layering and adding something, it's because it's needed to counteract an interpretation that has been there. Article 40.3 talks about the property rights of the individual. Article 43 talks about private ownership, in fact, being balanced to be regulated by principles of social justice. Article 43.2 talks about the state on occasion delimiting the exercise of those private property rights with a view to reconciling their exercise with the exigencies of the common good. And the unfortunate thing is that it has not been interpreted that the common good will outweigh property rights on occasion. The scope potentially was there, but because we haven't had that case law, we know how many good pieces of law have not been moved forward because they have been claimed to be blocking property rights. And it's not simply the ones I remember my own, a vacant site tax, which we were told couldn't be done, and then it did come in. You know, I've had some, particularly we've had the experience in our own civil engagement group of proposals we put forward that we were told would undermine property rights, though a year or two later those proposals did come forward. But it came in too on things in relation to domestic violence and the rights of the home. It's come in terms of the relationship, in terms of the recognition, the status of illegitimacy. The amount of times that property rights has been given this heavy weighting and emphasis in interpretation. That is why we need this amendment. I don't know if we had interpreted differently, if we would need it, but we do need it now. And it's not simply, and you know, with respect, of course, yes, when you create rights, you create responsibilities. But the concern at the moment is that the state already has responsibilities to its citizens which it is not fulfilling because of concerns about the Constitution as framed at the moment. So the responsibilities are already there, and I think the idea of including the right to housing in the Constitution is to ensure that the state can meet its responsibilities. I want to speak briefly to the wording, and I think others have spoken, and Senator Fitzpatrick indeed in proposing spoke about the fact that this is done all over the world. It's done in constitutions, it's done through legislation. It is part of the Sustainable Development Goals. However, the wording, and I would note, I absolutely support the Home for Good campaign, and I know that my former colleague, Senator Colette Kelleher, was an incredibly strong champion on this issue, in promoting this issue. However, I would note, I do wonder of that language. I think it perhaps could be stronger. And the 2 points I would note in it, again, I think, is this: the recognising and vindicating the rights of all persons of access to adequate housing is good, but the state should, through legislative and other measures, provide for the realisation of that right within its available resources. And I would just say, we need to be clear, the power that the state gets given through this referendum is not simply the responsibility to use its resources to deliver housing, but it has to have the power to produce laws which may temper private property rights. So we may need to use the reference to the word the law in that first part of the clause also. And I note that, in fact, the People Before Profit bill that they put forward, I actually really like the way that they've worded it, because they've included the phrase in terms of dignity, which is in the economic, social and cultural rights. And they talk about vindicating through law and policy. And the last point I would say, and this relates back to the big concern that I hope we can address in the Affordable Housing Bill, the state must guard its resources so that it can fulfil this. And if we give away public land to the private market, we are in danger of not having the resources that we need to vindicate the rights that are rightly being proposed right now. So let us make sure we protect the resources of the state so we can use them for that common good. Thank you. And again, I support the motion.
Carmela Margaret and Senator Shane Cassells.
Thank you very much, Cathaoirleach. You're very welcome, Minister. And I want to start by paying tribute to Senator Mary Fitzpatrick for bringing forward this motion this afternoon. She's been a tenacious battler when it comes for advocating for the right to housing, for sustainable housing, and her contributions on the topic of housing since she has come to this chamber, and indeed a committee over the past year, have been very significant. Now, there are many who state, what does it matter to go and have a referendum on housing? In fact, would say go and spend the many millions that you would save by having a referendum on a small scheme of houses somewhere in the country. And maybe they're right. But the issue at stake here is how we view housing in the country to begin with, because there are plenty who come into this chamber, more so in the Dáil, and roar and shout that housing is treated as a commodity. Now, those who do that, of course, haven't a bull's notion, or even worse, don't care of how finance is raised to acquire the capital, to start a scheme, to pay for the raw materials, pay the wages, pay the subcontractors and build the homes. They skip over that bit in the debate, ignore the issues pertaining in the marketplace with rising costs of raw materials because of COVID. Because of them, the marketplace is not something to concern them. For everyone else, the real world is a concern. But going back to whether housing is treated as a commodity or a right, there's a core belief among everyone in the Fianna Fáil party that housing is a right. And that has been demonstrated over decades of when Fianna Fáil were in government. Building housing estates across the length and breadth of this country is a testament to that. It's a physical edifice which can't be ignored for those who want to say otherwise. I can walk out the driveway of my home place and my parents' house in the centre in Navan. Facing me and every side of me are estates built by Fianna Fáil over the decades. What we've seen in recent decades is a shift away from the construction of large council estates and moving towards mixed tenure estates. Now, there are good arguments put forward by the experts in housing and the logic behind that. Quite frankly, I disagree. Experts will argue that it's not just about building homes, it's about communities, and that previous large-scale projects were then associated with massive social deprivations. For me, the same problems are now being experienced in large private housing estates built during the boom. Why? Because the core issue of the provision and supply of the community infrastructure wasn't addressed there either. So, really, that goes to the core of it. And indeed, one of the experts in this field is John O'Connor, who, when I was a journalist, I interviewed for the Public Sector magazine on this very topic many years ago, and I teased it out with him, and he's a strong believer in this particular philosophy. And he's now been appointed to chair the new Housing Commission by the Minister, and the Government believes that Mr O'Connor and the Commission should look at this issue of a referendum and asserting the right to a home. Minister, while that is also being trashed out, one area that could be dealt with by the Customs House in your department is the big requirement for dealing with this crisis, and that's land. During the last term, I questioned the then Secretary of the Department, John McCarthy, the Public Accounts Committee, and you were sitting beside me and posed questions as well, on the delivery of homes by local authorities. And one of the areas that I focused on was that of land banks in local authorities, and namely the fact that a lot of counties where the pressure for homes, both private and social, is at its most pressing, there's a significant shortfall of land. In particular, the commuter counties, Meath, Kildare, Wicklow. Meath County Council has no significant land banks worth talking about to deliver homes, the very essence of what you need before you can deliver. And yet, when I raised that point on the day, the response back to me was the department wasn't in the market for land. They were working through the land banks from the land aggregation scheme, which bailed out councils who had done bad deals for land banks during the boom years. Some of the land they bought, you wouldn't put hens out to lay eggs in them. You'd wonder what they were at in the first place to have actually acquired them. I'll come back to my original point of how the philosophy of people in high places being adopted then as policy by departments over the past decades of not building large council-led estates, regardless of the merit being put forward by the philosophy, has allowed a scenario developed where there simply weren't enough homes to satisfy those who wanted them, and that was a failure. The fact that there are 4,500 people on the housing waiting list of my own county in Meath shows that it's a failure. It can't be called anything else. So the work that we were completing today on the Affordable Housing Bill in the Shannon before you arrived, Minister, is crucial in rebalancing that philosophy, giving people the chance to own their own home through initiatives such as the Shared Equity Scheme. Crucially also the increase in the percentage of affordable and social homes being made available in developments up to 20%. And the Land Development Agency has a big role in rebalancing the supply and regenerating areas of dereliction. Some of the proposals on the books of the LDA are really imaginative. They do build more than homes. They rejuvenate areas as well, of which I am a huge advocate for. So I pay tribute to Minister Darragh O'Brien, and indeed yourself and Minister Noonan, for working hard on the Affordable Housing Bill, because there is a change of attitude here. But as Senator Mary Fitzpatrick stated in her contribution here earlier, she made the point that regardless of who is going to be in power in these houses in the coming decades, how do we compel the state to live up to the standards we expect when it comes to delivering sustainable homes for all of our people? And so she's dead right to have this conversation about the right to a home, in tandem with the work that's going on to actually go about and build the homes we need. Because that is what we're all about here. It's a change of attitude of how we approach housing. And I hope that as part of that change of attitude will come when the Government and Mr O'Connor, in his new role as Chair of the Housing Commission, look at this issue being proposed today by Fianna Fáil, and that they deal with it positively. Because if they attempt to fudge it, it's going to be back on your desk and the Minister's desk fairly sharpish. Thank you, Minister.
Senator John McGahn.
Thank you very much, Ciarán. Yeah, I suppose today, Minister, I just want to take a more rounded approach to this discussion around housing, and it's been very good today that the entire discussion in this House today has been resolved around housing, and even in the last 2 weeks as well, which is really good to show that we all see the urgency behind this very important issue about the importance of actually getting it solved. And I just want to take a wider approach and touch on some of the comments I made during the second stage debate of the Affordable Housing Bill. The first one is actually kind of the wider approach in relation to mortgages, and just through the total and utter lack of competition in the Irish mortgage market, and how that then, I suppose, in one sense, does tend to freeze out a lot of people. So, I'll just give a couple of clear examples. You know, competition is key, and where you have competition, you're going to have people trying to give the consumer a better deal. During the week, I was just really struck by this. It really came forward to me where I had a couple who came to me, good friends of mine, who have come home from working in the NHS in London. Both have very, very incredible, really good jobs. Both have substantial deposits as well. The wife has now started working for the HSE. The husband, though, is still working for the NHS, but is working across the border. And no bank, nobody will give them a mortgage because he's paid in sterling. like no one is giving them a mortgage because he's paid in sterling. And that's just, a bank is able to just decide to do that. And if we had competitiveness and competition, something like that wouldn't happen. And instead, what the family are now having to do, they're having to go to the local authority, they're having to get a mortgage through the local authority, but they're not the type of people who that scheme was designed for in the first instance, because they're more than capable of getting a mortgage from a lender. So I just think there is just one small example that encapsulates the lack of competition there at the moment. And the other issue behind it as well is when I've been trying to get mortgages and loans in the last couple of months, you know, the biggest problem I have here, which we all have, is that we haven't got stable employment, is what they turn around to say, right? Which is fair enough. But the point is, where you have someone paying 900 quid a month in rent, like surely a mortgage lender or a bank should be able to look at that and say, well, okay, they clearly have the capacity to pay 900 quid a month. They're not saving it, but we'll take that 900 quid and take it into consideration, but they're not, you know, and that's just another unfair example of how we need to widen that level of competition around it. In terms of local authorities and how it's going to be a local authority-led building houses, I think we need to have really clear definitive targets of what we expect from local authorities, and to actually remember that it's not just a Dublin-centred debate, it is a country-wide debate, and other local authorities are going to be able to deliver housing better than lesser local authorities. So we need to set clearly definitive targets. What are we going to set for Louth County Council, Leitrim County Council, Offaly County Council? You know, it doesn't have to always be about Dublin City Council or Dublin this or Dublin that. I get the vast majority of the population is there, but we have to have a more wider approach to that. I'd really be interested as well, and I said this during the Affordable Housing Bill, is how will the chief executives of local authorities be held accountable if that a local authority isn't failing to hit the type of targets that they need in terms of house building. Another thing that I think we should actually roll out right across the country is a scheme where we use compulsory purchase orders to take vacant and derelict houses, a lot of them that are kind of caught up in vulture funds or they're going through issues of probate with families. Louth County Council ran a really impressive pilot project for the last couple of years. They were the forerunner of all local authorities in Ireland about doing it. And I think if we could replicate a dedicated funding scheme, similar to the Voids programme that we give money to local authorities, if we could replicate that for compulsory purchase orders of vacant homes, I think that could go a long way as well. And in the last time I kind of spoke here, and I saw it last night on, what was Richard Bruton on last night? Matt Cooper, on Matt Cooper last night. And you see it in this house as well a little bit. It's very much, the whole debate around housing is just ideological driven. And the point that I made 2 weeks ago was that, like, I'm 30 years of age. If you were to ask any of my mates or any of my friends, you know, people who are normal people, right? They don't care whether the house is built on public land or private land. They don't care if the house is built by a local authority or by a developer. They just want the opportunity to be able to work hard and get a house in life, get an affordable house in life. And I think that, just the common sense of the approach, is missed sometimes when we in this House perhaps get up to the higher echelons of debate and discussions around housing. That what does the average person on the street on this country want to be able to do? They just want the opportunity to buy their own home. And I really think that we just can lose sight of that sometimes when we get bogged down in the ideological aspects of the housing debate. And what's the quickest way to do that? It's just build, 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 increase supply, increase supply. And once we do that, that's when you start seeing housing lists in local authorities going down. That's when you see people of my age, my generation, being able to buy an affordable house. That's when you see people going in to get effective cost rental housing, or living in an estate that's mixed use. You have social housing, you have private housing, you have affordable housing. That's the way forward. And by having those very clear mixes of housing, I think that's a really good way to get away from the mistakes of the past in the 1980s, or in my own area where we built substantial social housing en masse or en bloc. But look, there are just a couple of the key points that I just wanted to bring to this debate. I just think it is so simple. Over the next 3 years, or the lifetime of this government, we need to set, and we are doing it through the affordable housing, through the legislation that went through today. But to be brief about it is set clear, definitive targets. We want to build 8,000 houses this year. We want to build 8 the next year. We want to build 8 the year after. I think we are doing that. And now it's the case that and I am absolutely confident that we're going to deliver on that. And in 3 years' time, this government will be able to turn around to say, this is what the housing issue was like when this government took over. This is where we've left it. And you'll have people of my generation being able to buy affordable houses. And that's just the key of it at the end of the day.
Thank you indeed. Senator McGahan, our next speaker, is Senator Crockwell, please.
Thank you very much. At the outset, I want to congratulate the Senator for bringing this motion forward. Your constant speeches here on housing and on homelessness are to be commended. However, unlike most of my colleagues here, I do not support a constitutional referendum on housing. I think it's a nonsense, complete waste of time. Senator McGahan, in his address there a few moments ago, brought us down to the street, to the ordinary 30-something-year-old who's trying to buy a house. I had a phone call from a relation the other day about this debate here. And she said to me, what exactly does it mean if there is a constitutional amendment passed that gives me the right to home if I can't afford it? What does it mean? Does it mean that I can go to the courts and force somebody to give me a house at a particular price? I can't. So quite frankly, sticking in the Constitution is too crude an instrument. Way too crude entirely. Now what we need to do is we need to address two things. Senator Alice Mary Higgins spoke about the laws in this country which protect property rights. And it's amazing how those laws can protect the property rights of the extremely wealthy. And when it comes to a private soldier on a pension, that property right, his pension, we cannot protect. We abate it if he gets another job in the public service. I bought and sold or rented 13 houses in my life. None of them were for to make an income. They were because the first house I had, I lost because of a bad business decision. And in those days, you could go into a bank and you could explain to them what went wrong. And you could get another mortgage and get started again. Now, Senator McGahan has spoken about 900 quid a month. I know a couple that were paying 1,800 euros a month. 1,800 euros a month. They couldn't possibly save a deposit. But our central bank says if you don't have the money, you can't. If you don't have a deposit, you can't buy a house. Now, Minister, that's where we need to start, with the law. And we need to have the central bank recognise that there are people out there who are paying rents which would pay a mortgage and leave them with change. Leave them with money in their pockets that they could live a normal life, that they could enjoy life. My good God, tonight, when you're spending every penny you have to feed yourself and keep a roof over your head, 1,800 euros for a one-bedroom apartment. And don't you worry about it. We'll look after the property rights of the individual who owns the apartment. But what about the unfortunate couple who cannot dream about having a child because where are they going to put the child? Right? So they can't do that. They cannot have any sort of a reasonable life because they're on, the particular couple I'm talking about are on a pretty reasonable wage. But at the end of the day, they will never, ever, ever save the money for a deposit. So all the constitutional amendments in the world is not going to get them into a house. Why, Minister, have we over 500 housing agencies in the country? What happened to the local authorities in the 1950s when we had nothing? Who built houses? And not only did they build houses, I remember my father telling me about how if a piece of timber arrived on the site with a knot in it, it was sent back. Our local authorities built the finest houses, and I think Senator Cassell's adverted to that in his speech. They built the finest of houses, and we accommodated people in the finest of accommodations. What have we done now? In my own area, I see, for the second time, I see a housing estate completed, and there's a wall around it. Nobody in it. Why? Are they waiting for the prices to go up? I saw another housing estate where the builder released the houses and about one every 3 months. They started off somewhere around about 750,000. They finished up at 1.2 million. What is going on? At the end of the day, Senator Fitzpatrick, you really are a great advocate for people who are homeless and for those who need homes. But forgive me for going against you on this. The Constitution is not the solution. I have no idea whether your bill, Minister, or Minister O'Brien's bill on affordable housing is going to do anything. God help me, but I'm sick to the back teeth of listening to, we now have the solution to housing. Because I'm listening to it for so long that I'm beginning to dread it. When I bought my first house, 2.5 times my salary was enough to get me a mortgage. Tell me anybody that will get a mortgage today at 2.5 times their salary, unless they're on a massive salary. It's just not going to happen. So really what we need to do is we need to temper the property rights of individuals who own massive tracts of land with the social needs of the individuals that Senator Fitzpatrick is talking about. That's what we need to do. And the Constitution, when we catch up to the demand that there is in the country, when we have started to house the people that are in the country, then let's put in a constitutional referendum to the right to housing and make sure everybody from here on out has the right to housing. Senator McGahan is correct. If there's a little bit of a shady side to your employment that you might lose your job by way of an election, oh, you're not getting a mortgage of us because we want somebody who is blueprinted, guaranteed for the future. So, Minister, you have a massive job ahead of you. And they used to talk about health being the Angola. I'm afraid housing is the Angola now. I wish you and your colleagues the very best. And I apologise to Senator Fitzpatrick for rejecting her constitutional side to this particular argument. But you are a decent person who wants the best for people, and I accept that.
Thank you very much, Senator Crockwell. Now, if we go back to Senator Paul Daly, please.
And I welcome the Minister to the House. And I want to start at the outset. I don't think I will need the full time, because most of what I have here in front of me has already been covered and said. But at the outset, I want to also be associated with complimenting Senator Fitzpatrick, who has taken her brief in the housing role to an extreme, I would say. Her work ethic and her dedication to the cause has been seconded by nobody that I've known in these houses since my first election in 2016. Her role within our parliamentary party, she has a weekly meeting for subcommittees for anybody who wants to attend, and I don't think it's happening under any other brief, and I am not claw-mossing or just clapping one of my own on the back for the sake of it when I have the opportunity. She thoroughly deserves our thanks and gratitude, and I welcome her private member's bill here today, and I'm delighted to support it. And I would say, and I see, Senator Crockwell, exactly where you're coming from, and there's nobody here who won't recognise or won't acknowledge the fact that at the moment we have a housing crisis, and irrespective of what rights are in the Constitution, where there's a supply and demand issue, where we don't have the supply, the demand outruns the supply, a constitutional right cannot be met. But I would disagree with you to the extent that, in my opinion, the extraordinary advantage of having what I would call a basic human right, of adequate, appropriate and affordable to your circumstances housing right within the Constitution is, in my opinion, giving recognition to all others, fellow citizens, brethren within the community who are duty-bound by the same Constitution, who are giving them that recognition of your right, and how unconstitutional it then would be to object to your houses being built which could and possibly would satisfy or meet your constitutional right. Let them houses be in Tala or Clondalkin, and let the role of the citizen who would be objecting be a private citizen or a public representative. They would then, and that, I think, in addressing Senator Crockwell's point, that, in my opinion, would be the strength of having a housing right within the Constitution. It would be the recognition by everyone else of your right and, as I say, not objecting to that right. I was thinking there, as somebody who's very strongly and actively involved in the GAA, I was thinking about, when we all acknowledge that there is a shortage, and if we don't have the houses, it's like when the famous All-Ireland tickets come to the club every year. The club gets 2. And somebody hears you won the 2 All-Ireland tickets to think you're heading off to Croke Park on a freebie. You actually win the right to buy. And I think it's a good comparison to a constitutional right to a house. Some people out there actually think if we put this into the Constitution, a right to a house, people are going to get houses for free. You have a constitutional right to a house. The government are going to have to give me a house. We like the ticket. You win the right to buy the house. It's an adequate and appropriate and affordable, in my opinion, to your circumstances, right to have a house. But we need to, in the amendment has been proposed by Sinn Féin. They're demanding a date for the referendum. We're a long way from that. As I say, I welcome Senator Fitzpatrick's motion here today. I support it. And I think now it should go, as is suggested, to the Commission on Housing. And as Senator Castles has mentioned, under the chairmanship of John O'Connor. We need to get this right. We need to get the wording right. And we need, along with our Housing for All project, our Affordable Housing Bill, the Land Development Agency, we need to ensure that we can provide the houses that we are suggesting giving the people the right to. And there are so many uncontrollable issues out there. Within the last 18 months, COVID, construction being closed down. And now as a result of COVID and as a result of Brexit, an area that I have some involvement in, building materials are skyrocketing in price. So the goalposts keep moving. It's hard to get ahead of the curve, and it's equally as hard if you do get ahead of the curve to stay ahead of it. But collectively, and collectively is the word, this is not a political issue. I think the fiasco we had here on the Affordable Housing Bill earlier, where we had votes proposed and tellers not appointed, just for the sake of being able to say, if you're accused of supporting something, oh no, we called a vote on that, and move on. You don't say, well, we didn't actually follow through in the vote, but we called it. And playing politics with issues like that is not on. The time is gone. We all recognise the crisis we're in. We all recognise the right. Well, it's not in the Bunrock at the moment. We want to see it in there. But we have to work collectively. And playing political populism with issues of such importance is not on. It never was, and it never should be.
On Kate Contarella, Senator Michael Carrigy, and my understanding is that you're proposing to share time with Senator Siri Carney.
2 minutes and 4 minutes.
Sorry?
2 minutes and 4 minutes.
2 minutes and 4. Is that agreed with the House? Agreed. So,
thank you, Cahill. I just wish to welcome the Minister and support the motion from Senator Fitzpatrick. And I think it highlights what the government plan to, over the next number of years, to deliver. And it's important to note that the government takes housing the crisis extremely seriously, and that we're taking action and that we're willing to deliver social, affordable and private housing through whatever mechanism is possible to deliver what is needed, and that is homes. And I think it's important that the state uses every available asset that we have to support the citizens in doing that. I believe the combination of the Affordable Housing Bill, the Land Development Agency and budgets that will be provided will provide homes for everybody for decades to come. The programme of government between the three parties commits to building on the foundation of rebuilding Ireland to delivering housing for all. And indeed the document expresses the core belief that everybody should have access to good quality housing for purchase or at an affordable rent. And I think it's vital that we deliver on that. In my own county at the minute we have over 800 people on the housing list, but I must say that we have a very proactive director in John Brannigan that is delivering housing into our county. And indeed I think Minister Burke was in Longford today where there was 3 schemes launched, and I think what we need in our own county is a mix of affordable and social. But I do believe, and I think it was Senator John McGahan said about the fact we need to ask questions of all local authorities. Some local authorities are not delivering, and somebody needs to be made accountable for this. I'd ask you also, Minister, to look at some other possible schemes that can provide family homes for people, and that is the downsizing of people from larger houses or the 3-4 bedroom houses that might want to downsize to 2 bedroom accommodations and free that up, and indeed the whole tax rent scheme for those where people are gone into long-term care under the Fair Deal scheme that are sitting empty throughout the country. I look forward to working with you, and I think it's incumbent that we work with all parties to make sure we deliver what we promise to do, and not use, as has been said here, this as a political football, and especially what we've seen in the last hour to try and win an upcoming by-election. Thank you.
Senator Siri Carney, please.
Thank you, Senator Carrigy. I mean, I very much, of course, I support this. Of course, I do. I think that for us to have it enshrined in the Constitution is natural and correct. I do have reservations about adequacy
and housing, those two words, that I think that we have a lot of work to do in defining them and ensuring that they're correct. You know, one of the interesting things in studying law is in constitutional law, there are whole sections of our constitution that are remarkably similar in wording to the constitution in India and the constitution in South Africa, and in both instances the interpretation of clauses in the constitution from a socio-economic benefit is different to the way that we interpret it. So in that, Senator Higgins is very right. So how we interpret it, what right that gives people, is something that we really need to give good consideration to, and no one better than John O'Connor in heading up the Commission and in able to facilitate that discussion in conjunction with the very fine ministers that we have over in the Custom House, including yourself especially, our own Minister Burke. I think that in it, I suppose, in listening to the debate today and being part of the Housing Committee, you know, it's so easy to throw away words like your pals, the investors, your pals, the venture funds, your pals, the developers. It's such a lazy, populist, throwaway trope to throw at minister and at members of government. You know, I don't know any investors. I actually genuinely don't. I know one developer who they, as a family, made a decision to put their own home up as collateral when they decided to buy a little piece of land at the height of the boom to try and create a business. They were employing other people. They were providing homes for others and had been building, and they put their own collateral. They're now homeless. They're now living in rented accommodation. They lost everything when the bust came. So, you know, there are lots of developers, there are lots of builders across the country that are small people, small little businesses who took ventures, who want to get back and who can be back in providing. And how will they do that? Well, they'll do that on the provisions that will flow from the land development, the LDA bill, the affordable housing today, all of the many types of tenure, the types of variety of tenure, the bringing of diversity of society into the communities. They will do it through things like that. You know, we need longer security of tenure for people who are renting. We need it to be lifelong. We need people to be able. So that's where we come back to what is adequate and what is housing. What is adequate has to be something that reflects where people are coming from and what their need is. And in that, I think that the housing needs and demands assessment, that whole tool is fantastic. I think it's great. I know I'm one of its biggest fans, but I think it's great because we get local knowledge but we need to elevate that for it to command what gets planning permission, what is submitted, that you can't just decide that you're going to build whatever on a site, even if it's a private site. That needs to be, it needs to reflect that housing needs and demands. You know, I think that a community has to have an opportunity to trade down and stay within their own community, to trade up and allow the growth of families. So when we're doing developments, when we're planning communities, that has to reflect all of those things. So congratulations, Mary. It's really good. It was a good thing to bring forward. It's a good debate, especially at the end of today. But no more populism. For the populism of the opposition is just sickening when real people need real housing, and we see the likes of the non-vote today, and the lack of their courage, their convictions, is really quite the sickening thing to watch. But well done.
Thank you indeed, Senator Siri Carney. Senator Malcolm Byrne. A breathless Senator Malcolm.
Just in time. Gurmagach Cahirlach, and thank you, Minister.
An eloquent one.
Thank you very much, Las Cahirlach, and thank you, Minister, for coming into the House. And like my colleagues, I would also pay tribute to Mary Fitzpatrick for all the work that she's put in on this issue. And she's tried to do it in a way that is collaborative with others, which is important. This motion, to me, a bit like when Senator Castles was speaking earlier, it's very personal to me. It's about part of the reason why I got involved in politics and about the important things for us in politics. So what are the important things that we can do as politicians? And for me, it's about creating the conditions for employment in our community, giving people access to education, and ensuring people have a roof over their head and that they can aspire to own their own home. And for me, that's part of the reason why I'm in Fianna Fáil. They're core values. For us in Fianna Fáil, being able to build housing, people having access to affordable housing, that's really important. And I know, like Shane, when I grew up in Gorey, it was local authorities that built social and affordable estates in all of our communities. They really made a difference. And we're the strong believers in local government as well. And I find it very difficult for those of us who are in the political centre or on the centre-left to now be hearing these right-wing policies about abolishing property taxes, while at the same time taking large foreign donations. Those kind of right-wing policies have no place, I believe, in our housing or local government system. We've got to have, if we're going to get our local authorities to build housing, we have to have properly funded local government. I think that it's essential. The Constitution, I was listening to Senator Higgins earlier, and she's right about how the Constitution has been interpreted. I'm very proud of our Constitution. It was the first Constitution that was adopted by popular vote of any Constitution in the world. And there were lots of inherent rights contained within that Constitution for us as citizens. And if you think about it, it was in the 1930s in Western Europe. And our citizens voted for that document. And there were good reasons at the time as to why private property had to be protected. Because if you were living in Western Europe or anywhere in Europe during the 1930s, private property rights were not being respected. But we have now moved to a different circumstance. And I would disagree with Senator Crockwell around not having the aspiration around a constitutional right to housing, because he knows, as I do, around the protections that have been provided around education within our Constitution and how our Constitution has been used to guarantee educational rights, particularly for some of those who are the most vulnerable in our society. The Constitution is the most important document in our state, and therefore I believe to recognise the fact that there should be a roof over individuals' heads within that document is something that is particularly important. Senator Higgins was correct. I think it's been unfortunate about how there has been interpretation that effectively excludes the common goods over a long period. And we need to provide that necessary rebalancing. This is, as colleagues have said here, this is the greatest domestic challenge that we face, is about providing housing. And unlike others, it's not about some magic solution that we're going to click fingers, walk into a local authority chief executive and say, we're going to build lots of housing, while at the same time disparaging, not developers, as Senator Siri Carney said, builders. That's what they are. They're not big developers. Most of those, small firms around the country are just builders. And we're going to require a suite of measures, even though everyone hates that phrase, to address the challenge that we have. And that includes the two pieces of legislation we're dealing with, the Affordable Housing Bill, the Land Development Agency Bill. It includes addressing the costs that Paul spoke about, the underlying costs that are increasing housing. It includes alignment between the planning regulator and Board Planol and Irish Water. It needs all of those measures. It needs our local authorities to be properly funded. It needs our local authorities to be working with the private sector. And I don't know why people have such an objection to the private sector. Who is going to build these houses? It's going to be the builders that live in all of our communities. The builders who in turn will employ the subcontractors, the electricians, the brickies, the plumbers. Why is there such a real objection to engaging with the private sector? I just can't figure it out. We are not going to be able to achieve the supply that we all need unless we have the public sector and the private sector cooperating. This government knows about the challenge that we're going to face. This motion on its own is not going to suddenly solve our housing crisis. But it says something for us as a national parliament, that we put a belief in a right to housing into our constitution. And I think, and I don't believe in necessarily naming the date straight away, I think having that discussion, having a broader public conversation around the issue about the exact wording will be very useful. I strongly support the motion. It's personal to me, Alice Keirlock, and again, I commend the proposer for bringing it before the House.
Thank you, Senator Byrne. Now, our next speaker is Senator Paddy Burke, and it's my understanding, Senator Burke, you propose to share time.
Yes, with Senator Ahern. Is that agreed?
Yeah, agreed.
Great, thanks. Thanks very much. First of all, I'd like to welcome the Minister Burke back to the House and compliment Senator Fitzpatrick for bringing forward this motion, which is a very important motion. And I fully support the right that everybody should have a right to have a house. And there are different forms of how a person can have a house, whether it's a full ownership or whether it's long-term rental with security, or whether it's public housing. And there, as I said, there's various ways that they can have it. And Minister, just a couple of issues, I think, in relation to the Rebuilding Ireland plan that was put in place. That's mainly cities, you build around cities. But in some of the smaller towns, we've had zoning done for years, and some of that land could be rezoned for housing. It may be zoned as industrial or whatever, and you may never get an industry into those smaller towns now. And I think it's an area that you should look at, because when you rezone, you have to dezone some other place, and it's an area that you should look at, because I know of a number of towns where industrial land could be very useful for housing, and it has all the services to go. The other thing, Minister, is in relation to Irish Water. It's taken up to 16 weeks for Irish Water to process applications for water and sewerage services. And then when you consider the planning application will take 12 to 16 weeks as well, this is a long period of time for housing applications, and with the costs the way that they are progressing and rising at the moment, this is putting very considerable pressure on builders who are trying to price jobs and with the delay in the time. And I don't see any reason why Irish Water shouldn't be able to reduce the time that it's taken for them to process those planning applications. And I do think that the local authority could reduce their time as well. We are in a housing crisis, and I think that every effort should be made to make it easier for people to get planning permission, to make it easier for them to get connections for water and sewerage, and that everybody should be putting the shoulder to the wheel in relation to providing houses, because as every other senator has said here, we're in a housing crisis, and whatever has to be done should be done to make it possible that we can get our people housed in the months and years ahead.
Thank you, Senator Burke. Senator Ahern.
Thanks very much, Laska Hirlock, and can I welcome the Minister to the Chamber today, and thank Senator Fitzpatrick for bringing this very important issue to the floor. As Senator Burke just said, and you know, Minister, I've spoken to you on Irish Water numerous times, and the challenges that areas have, and certainly my county in Tipperary have, in relation to water supply and wastewater treatment, and the challenges that brings in terms of having houses for everyone. You know, you could solve all of the problems, and we have so many problems or challenges in terms of building houses, but you could solve all of the problems that have been discussed here today, and there's still areas in Tipperary, large rural towns and villages in Tipperary, that you can't build because of a lack of water supply and funding in that area. And I know there's been a large amount of funding put in already, but certainly the way Irish Water decide in terms of where that money is put is crucial, and it needs to be in line with local authorities and local authority plans in relation to where they invest, and it should be in terms of growth and areas of growth. The other aspect we have, the other issue we have as well at the moment, and I've never seen it happen before, where we have so many people who are being approved mortgages, more than ever in the history of the state. So banks are willing to approve mortgages for people to build, but they're not willing to give ordinary builders money to build the houses. So we're in a situation where there's builders who want to build, they have people coming to them asking them to build, they have the money to build, but the builders aren't getting any money up front from banks or lenders. to build. And until that is solved, we're still going to have a problem. And certainly in rural areas, and there's so many things being brought through from our rural future and encouraging people to move out of big cities and come and live in rural Ireland. The other thing we need to do as well, and as Senator Burke spoke about this before at a different debate, is the restrictions in terms of planning laws and how they need to be eased for people to live in rural Ireland. And you'd know it yourself, Minister, in Westmeath. There's a lot of people who've left at a young age, 18 or 19, went to college, worked in Dublin for 10 or 15 years, want to come home. We want them to come back. We want them to live in rural Ireland and spend in our area. But we need to relax the measures in terms of giving them an opportunity to come back. It's not possible for someone to move back into an area, stay there for 7 years and then be able to build. We need to relax that. I just wanted to touch as well on a point that Senator Patrick made earlier on. And I know she's in the middle of an election, so we have to be lenient in some way. But she did say that the government in the last 10 years haven't delivered at all in housing. It's important to remind people that post-COVID in 2019, we built more houses in 2019 than we did in the last decade. And she said in the chamber that in the last 5 years, the government didn't deliver on housing. And she was quite specific in terms of mentioning it was the last 5 years, because if you look beyond 5 years, it was a Labour minister who was in charge. And it was a Labour minister previous to that who was in charge. And if she thinks that Fine Gael and Owen Murphy and Simon Coveney and Fine Gael didn't deliver on housing to a certain extent, if she thinks that we failed in it, what does she think her party leader did when he was in the Department of Housing? Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Senator Ahern. I think at this point, the Minister will. It's my great pleasure to invite Minister Burke to respond to the debate.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and I thank all the members for contributing on the debate, which is a very valuable debate, I must say. I understand there is also a further counter-motion which has been submitted, which shows the depth of views that there are on this issue. We have supported the debate this evening in terms of the motion before the House, and I thank Senator Fitzpatrick and her colleagues for putting forward the motion. From the outset, I want to say how important it is that we don't rush to judgment in terms of to the electorate with this commitment. We need to make sure that we give all the potential aspects of a referendum on housing detailed consideration. There are many complex issues involved which can impact on the rights in the Constitution and which need to be balanced in any proposed amendment. Our Constitution is for every citizen, and we need to protect against unintended consequences. We need to be absolutely clear on the full implications that could arise out of any amendment for the sake of all. A lack of clarity on all potential implications of an amendment can result in legal complications for years to come and deflect important resources away from our primary focus, which is to deliver the provision of homes for our citizens and, key, the prevention of homelessness. We do not want to see that. This is why the Government has committed to historic levels of funding for housing and homelessness preventions and is committed to ensuring affordable, quality housing solutions available for everyone in our society. The acknowledgement in the motion of the work that is currently underway across Government to deliver affordable housing for all our citizens is appreciated. It is this Government's aim to embed affordability at the heart of Ireland's housing system and prioritise the increased supply of social and affordable homes. Almost €690 million will be put into affordable measures, including a new affordable purchase shared equity scheme, a new cost rental home scheme, Rebuilding Ireland home loans, expanded Help to Buy scheme and through the Land Development Agency. The Affordable Housing Bill 2021 is currently before this House. The measures in this bill will, in the near term, improve market access for first-time buyers, stimulate and increase the number of new homes being developed, and provide the legislative structure for the development of cost rental system in Ireland for the first time. The bill also sets out the basis and affordable purchase shared equity scheme, which will help alleviate housing affordability challenges for certain groups in the short term, and will stimulate supply by providing confidence and viability of future private housing developments. The bill provides the statutory underpinning of affordable housing into the future, while the work to deliver schemes outlined in the bill is also well underway. In addition, on the 4th of May last, the Government also approved the drafting of amending Part 5 of the Planning and Development Act 2000 for the inclusion in the Affordable Housing Bill 2021 as committee stage amendments. This will see an increase in the current 10% social housing requirement related to all new housing developments to a mandatory 20% for social and affordable requirements. This, in addition to measures that we have already introduced through the traditional family homes, are protected by bulk purchase from investment funds. This has been done through immediate tax measures with stamp duty hike and longer-term measures through the planning system. These steps complement other government supports like direct build of affordable homes by local authorities, the extended Help to Buy scheme and a new shared equity scheme to help level the playing field for first-time buyers and turn generation rent into a generation that can own their own homes. Tackling homelessness remains a key priority for government. Budget 2021 reflects this priority with a provision of €218 million to support the provision of homelessness accommodation and support those experiencing homelessness. We can all acknowledge that securing a safe and affordable home for all needs real actions on the ground, and amending the Constitution on its own will not deliver what is needed. Central to addressing homelessness is increasing the supply of public, social and affordable homes. The historic provision of €3.3 billion in Budget 2021 will allow us, subject to the impact of COVID-19 this year, to meet the social housing needs of 28,500 households and support the delivery of 12,750 social homes. The review of the National Development Plan and the upcoming Housing for All plan, which will be published this summer, will set out an ambitious range of affordable housing targets across the country over the coming years. It is important to acknowledge the commitment to hold a referendum on housing and not just on the right to housing. We do not want to restrict the thinking on all potential options. It would be a mistake to think that the right to private property only relates to the very wealthy in our country. The private ownership of your own home is a matter of great concern, and we must not ignore this. With this in mind, there is another commitment in the programme for government, which will be critical to supporting the holding of a referendum on housing in a balanced and democratic way. We are establishing a commission on housing, and it is intended that this commission will examine a referendum on housing. Work on establishing the commission is advancing quickly, and the Minister has announced the appointment of the chair designate for the commission last week. This will be Mr John O'Connor, the retiring CEO of the Housing Agency, who will bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to this new post. The terms of reference will now be drafted in consultation with him, and having regard to the commitments in the programme for government and the forthcoming Housing for All plan, we intend to establish the Commission by September. The duration of the Commission will be set out clearly in the terms of reference once completed, and the reporting requirement will be established. Our approach will bring together experts from various sectors and will allow for the involvement of stakeholders and for a collective approach. This is important in a step to holding a referendum for a considered and democratic way. The proposals in the private members' bill tabled this evening, along with the counter-motion, can be evaluated further by the Commission, as well as the text by many other stakeholders who have expressed an interest in this referendum. Minister O'Brien has had the pleasure of meeting some stakeholders in this area already, including Mercy Law Centre and Home for Good Coalition, and we are keen to ensure that all voices can be heard in this fair and balanced way. The Commission will be asked to consider and evaluate all proposals and undertake research of relevance. Once the Commission has reported on the most appropriate form of words for a constitutional amendment, we intend to consult with Cabinet colleagues and seek the advice of the Attorney-General before putting it before the people. By supporting the debate in the House, and indeed in the Dáil yesterday evening, we informed the development of policy in relation to the holding of a referendum on housing and the establishment of a commission on housing. This is a critical part of the process, and we ensure that considerable thought has gone into this approach. So you can see clearly, members, in terms of the direction of travel that the government is going, and that's why the motion put forward by Senator Fitzpatrick is very welcome in that regard, as well as the motion that was before the Dáil last night. And just to make a very few brief comments in terms of issues that the senators raised here tonight, I think in the first instance, it's very clear that we have a huge challenge and we're working hard to resolve that challenge, and successive governments have done that. And just in the first instance, you always have to acknowledge where the demand has come from. And from 2011, as I always point out, demand was increasing rapidly year on year when the state had not the capacity to deliver social homes at scale. I think that gets lost in our debate so often, because right up to 2011, home building in Ireland decreased by 96%. There were no homes being built. And if you look again at the backdrop, and I'm at pains to point this out, to get to equilibrium is such a challenge, because at that stage we had 3,000 ghost estates right across our country. We were borrowing at 14%. We were under an IMF programme. 2/3 of construction workers had left this state. When we got to access the markets midway through 2014, it was at 14%. So it was very difficult to deliver housing at scale. And when you look at our local authority system, it was piloting the mortgage to rent because the local authority system was saturated with debt from unaffordable mortgages that were given out in that period. So the challenge was so great that every single year the demand for housing kept increasing, despite the lack of capacity within the state. And that's why I think the objective of the LDA will be a game changer in the market, because the LDA will have the capacity to go counter-cyclical than what the state can do. So in times when the state is stressed, it will be able to borrow on the markets, raise its own funding, and in times when it gets stressed in the markets, it will be able to hopefully use the state to raise funding. So it's a better insurance policy to deliver housing on an equal measure to meet demand. And Senator Siri Carney raised in terms of the HNDA, the Housing Needs Assessment. That's going to be a huge measure in terms of detailing the type of house that is needed in particular areas, what the demand in our locality, in our community, and give us a key assistance in building sustainable communities within each area. I think that's so important that we have that information and data. And, I hear previous governments, and I in no way will get political, but what I will do is absolutely and unapologetically stand up for the record of my party in government when I was first elected to the Dáil in 2016. And under Rebuilding Ireland, in each of the years, 2016, 17, 18, 19 and 20, it hit its targets for social housing delivery and exceeded them. And the big problem in our state was the private sector still wasn't building in each year. And that presented a huge challenge because the state was shouldering the lion's share of delivering housing in this state. And the figures absolutely back that up. I want to be very clear on that. I think drafting the idea and the intention of the LDA will prove to be a very considered and good policy choice for this country, because it will be delivering for all of our society across all tenures, our cost rental, our affordable, our social, giving certainty to so many households and so many citizens that really, really deserve that. And some people really try to, blacklist developers. When you're talking about our 31 local authorities building houses, who builds those houses? The local authorities enter into a public works contract under procurement law, and a builder in the private sector builds those homes and delivers those homes. That is a fact what happens. And we need to work with the private sector as well to raise finance, because I've made the point, over the next decade, our society will require at least a minimum of 350,000 new homes. And the state can't build all those homes on its own shoulders. It needs assistance to do that. And absolutely, in terms of the affordability measures that's been put into the bill, and a number of senators have raised it here, in terms of a minimum of 50%, and when you put our Part 5 together with that, it brings it up to 70%. So you can see the intention is so strong on behalf of the government. Huge amount of work to do with Irish Water, as was raised, because we have our National Development Plan review ongoing, and there is a lot of development I would absolutely accept that's held up because the infrastructure isn't there. But in planning policy, we've tried to change that and try to, through Project Ireland 2040, ensure that zoning and housing is aligned with key infrastructure. And if you look around the different counties, as I have been, the capacity, almost all local authorities have to increase by 100% over the next 6 years their housing demand. There's 9 that have to go over 200%. So we have a huge challenge in terms of the zoning capacity is there to do that. Now we have to get on with the job and do the simple things well. I think that's so important as well. You know, vacancy has been raised too in terms of the huge work we have to do through our vacant homes offices right up and down our 31 local authorities. So finally, just to say, I really thank the senators, and as I do taking the affordable housing bill through the Shannon last week, I know Malcolm Noonan, my ministerial colleague, was continuing that today. We did take amendments from the opposition. In my day, I understand the Minister did today as well, because we are listening to the contributions and we do value what this House has to offer. I want to be at pains to point out that, and we look forward to working with you through the length of time. I'm humbled to do this job, and my ministerial colleagues, and I thank again everyone for their contributions today. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Fitzpatrick, you have 5 minutes to respond to the debate.
Okay. Gurmagus Cahirlock, and I want to thank you, Minister, for your attendance here today, but also for your very positive response to this debate. And I want to thank my own party, the Fianna Fáil party, for supporting this motion and for the very kind words. I don't think I worked that hard at all, but I'll take the compliments, and it's a real honour for all of us to serve in this House, and it's a real honour for me to serve and to be part of the Fianna Fáil party group within the Shannon. And the reason I believe my colleagues were so committed to supporting this motion and to supporting this debate is not because they think this alone is going to solve the problem. It's not that they're in any way deluded to think that the housing problem is one that'll be fixed with a motion like this. It's because it speaks to our core values as a party, as a Republican Party that believes in equality and equality of opportunity. And we believe and we understand the intrinsic and essential value of having a safe and secure place to call home, from which to go to school, to go to college, to go to training, to go to work, to progress in the world, and to be and reach your full potential as a human being, and to make your contribution to society. And it's for that reason and that reason primarily that my colleagues support this motion, because we believe there needs to be a public debate on this issue. We absolutely value our constitution, and we would like to see this value of a right to adequate housing be enshrined in our constitution. I thank all of the members for their contributions here, and I accept that there is a majority support for this motion tonight. I think it's also very important to hear voices like Senator Craughwell, who is a reasonable man and who does, I believe, have good intentions, but he has serious and genuine concerns about this proposal, and that's the challenge we will face with this debate, and we need to engage everybody in this debate from all sides. I do not share the same respect or admiration for the cynical, divisive and destructive politics that was exposed and practiced here by Sinn Féin today. It really is purely cynical to use this as a politicking and campaigning tool. Sinn Féin laments the housing crisis, decries people's inability to have a secure and affordable home, and yet at every turn you obstruct, you delay and you prevaricate. You are not serious about trying to address the housing crisis. You are only serious about using the housing crisis as a political tool to drive disadvantage and division. Your by-election candidate has not been seen for the 16 hours of committee debate that we've had on the affordable housing bill. Was gone out the door and couldn't be seen for dust once she had her social media clip. Senator Warfield, we had hours of debate.
Speak about somebody. No.
I apologise. I'll restrict my comments to Senator Warfield. Senator Warfield, you were here, and I will give you credit for that. And you put forward amendments.
Point of order from Senator Warfield.
There is a long-standing tradition in this House where if a person is not here,
I've just
that they would not be referred to.
I've just had my attention drawn to that, and I apologise. I was unaware.
I have sat here all day.
I was just going to commend you for that.
Nobody here has sat here as long as I have.
I was going to commend you for that.
And many of you,
Please don't talk down my time. Please don't talk down my time. This is a tactic.
Many of you
You're talking down my time, Senator Warfield. Please, Senator Warfield. Senator Warfield. Senator Warfield.
Now, Senator
I apologise, Caherlock, I apologise. I really wasn't aware, and Senator Warfield, you are correct. You were here, and you did put forward amendments, and those amendments were debated, and the Minister engaged in it, and my party and other parties engaged in those debates. And when it came for the time to vote on the actual bill, the opposition called a vote, and then you wouldn't appoint tellers, so you wouldn't have to vote. That is what happened. It is on the record of this House, and it absolutely exposes this cynical, divisive and destructive politics that you are practising. So we will not be accepting the Sinn Féin amendment. I would welcome a vote on it, and we will call a vote and defeat that cynical, destructive amendment. What motivated me, my party colleagues, and I believe all colleagues from this government side today to engage in this debate was to seriously bring this issue forward. And I commend Home for Good. I commend everybody involved in that movement, but I also commend everybody, like Brother Kevin, like Sister Stanislaus, like all of the people who for decades have worked with those who are most disadvantaged and who most need people like us who are privileged in this House to lead this debate. Guramagat.
Thank you.